Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the empty hallway of the Riverside Concert Hall, her footsteps echoing in the silence. It was just past midnight, and the building had finally emptied out after another evening performance. The audience had gone home. The musicians had packed up their instruments. And now, like every night for the past 7 years, it was her turn to take the stage. But Rosa wouldn't be performing. She would be cleaning. At 53 years old, Rosa had become part of the furniture at the concert hall. People walked past her without a second glance. Sometimes they didn't even say thank you when she held the door open. To the well-dressed patrons in their expensive suits and glittering jewelry, she was just another face in the background. Just another person doing a job that nobody really thought about. Rosa didn't mind most days. She had learned long ago that life wasn't about being noticed. It was about getting by, paying the bills, and keeping your head down. Her job as a night janitor paid enough to cover rent on her small studio apartment across town. She could afford groceries. She could send a little money back home to her younger sister in the Philippines, who was raising 3 kids on her own. That was enough. She entered the main auditorium and paused at the doorway like she always did. The space took her breath away every single time. Row after row of red velvet seats stretched out before her, all facing the magnificent stage. The lighting was dim now, but she could still see the gleam of the grand piano sitting center stage, proud and beautiful under a single spotlight that someone had forgotten to turn off. Rosa left her cart by the door and walked down the aisle, her worn sneakers silent on the carpeted floor. She climbed the steps to the stage and approached the piano slowly, almost reverently. This was her favorite part of the night. The moment when she could pretend, just for a few seconds, that this world belonged to her too. The piano was a Steinway, worth more money than Rosa would make in 5 years. Its black surface was so polished that she could see her reflection in it. A tired woman with graying hair pulled back in a ponytail, dark circles under her eyes from too many late shifts, hands that were rough and red. From years of scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets, she pulled out her microfiber cloth, began wiping down the piano's surface, removing the fingerprints left behind by that evening's pianist. As she worked, she let her mind wander back to a time when her hands had touched piano keys for a different reason. She had been 12 years old, living in a small village outside of Manila. Her grandmother had been the church pianist, and everyone in the village said she had magic in her fingers. Rosa could still remember sitting beside her grandmother on the piano bench, watching those weathered hands dance across the keys, creating sounds that seemed to come straight from heaven. You have the gift? Little one, her grandmother would tell her in Tagalog, guiding Rosa's small fingers to the correct keys. Music is in your blood. I can see it in the way you listen. For 2 years, Rosa had learned, not from books or formal lessons, but from her grandmother's patient teaching. They couldn't afford real lessons, couldn't afford sheet music or proper instruction. But every day after school, Rosa would run to her grandmother's house, and they would sit at that old, slightly out-of-tune piano. And her grandmother would share everything she knew. Rosa learned to play hymns for the church services. She learned classical pieces that her grandmother had memorized decades ago. Her favorite was a Chopin nocturne that her grandmother said was the most beautiful piece of music ever written. Rosa practiced it over and over until she could play it with her eyes closed, feeling every note in her heart. Then her grandmother got sick. The cancer came quickly, and within 6 months, she was gone. Rosa was 14 years old, and the music died with her grandmother. Her family couldn't afford to keep the piano. They sold it to help pay for the medical bills. And just like that chapter of Rosa's life closed forever, or so she had thought. Rosa finished cleaning the piano and stepped back, her cloth hanging limply in her hand. 40 years had passed since those days. 40 years since she had really played. She had left the Philippines at 19, looking for a better life in America. She had worked as a housekeeper, a factory worker, a restaurant dishwasher. She had married a man who promised her the world, but left her with nothing but debt. She had survived, adapted, and learned to stop dreaming about impossible things. Music was for other people now. People who had money for lessons. People who had time to practice. People who came from families that encouraged such things. Not for a middle-aged janitor who cleaned up after those people, But standing here in the empty auditorium, with only the piano and the silence for company, Rosa felt that old familiar ache in her chest. The longing for something she had lost so long ago that sometimes she wondered if it had ever been real at all. She looked around the auditorium, making sure she was truly alone. The security guard wouldn't make his rounds for another hour. The building was locked up tight. Nobody would know. Rosa reached out and touched a single key, just one. The middle C, the note rang out clear and pure in the empty space, and the sound of it sent a shiver through her entire body. She hadn't heard that sound, that specific sound of her own finger creating music. In 4 decades, she pulled her hand back quickly as if the piano had burned her. What was she thinking? This wasn't her piano to touch. This was a professional instrument, worth a fortune, played by real musicians who had trained at prestigious schools. She was just the cleaning lady. Rosa grabbed her cloth and hurried back to her cart, her heart pounding. She spent the next 2 hours finishing her work, vacuuming the carpets, wiping down the bathrooms, taking out the trash. But her mind kept drifting back to that single note, that perfect, beautiful middle C that had sounded exactly like she remembered. By the time she finished her shift at 4 in the morning, Rosa was exhausted. She locked up the building, climbed onto the night bus, and rode across town to her apartment. She ate a simple dinner of rice and vegetables, showered, fell into bed as the sun started to rise, but she couldn't sleep. She lay there staring at the ceiling, her fingers moving slightly, as if they were remembering something her brain had tried to forget. She could hear her grandmother's voice, as clear as if the woman was sitting right beside her. "Music is in your blood, little one." Rosa closed her eyes and felt tears slip down her cheeks. She was 53 years old. She was a janitor. She had no business dreaming about music anymore. That part of her life was over before it had even really begun. But deep down, a place she had locked away for 40 years, something had awakened. That single note had opened a door she thought was sealed forever. And Rosa wasn't sure she could close it again, even if she wanted to. Tomorrow night, she would go back to the concert hall. She would push her cart down those hallways. She would clean the bathrooms and vacuum the carpets and take out the trash. And she would have to walk past that piano again. Rosa pulled her thin blanket up to her chin and tried not to think about what she might do when she did. 3 nights passed, and Rosa tried to push the memory of that single note out of her mind. She went about her work like always, cleaning the floors, polishing the mirrors, emptying the trash bins. But every time she entered the main auditorium, her eyes would drift to the piano, and her heart would start beating faster. She told herself she was being ridiculous. She was too old to be acting like a lovesick teenager. The piano wasn't going anywhere. It would always be there, silent and beautiful. And she would always be the janitor who cleaned it. That was just how things were. But on the 4th night, something felt different. It was a Tuesday, one of the quieter nights at the concert hall. There had been a small chamber music performance that evening. Nothing like the big crowds that came for the weekend shows. By 11:30, everyone had cleared out. Rosa had watched the last musician leave. Carrying his cello case down the front steps into the cool night air, she went through her usual routine. Started with the bathrooms on the 2nd floor. Moved to the offices. Cleaned the lobby. She saved the main auditorium for last, like she always did. When she finally pushed open the heavy doors, the clock on the wall read 2:47 in the morning. The auditorium was completely still. The stage lights were off, but the emergency exit signs cast a dim glow over everything. Rosa could just barely make out the shape of the piano in the darkness. She flipped on a few work lights, just enough to see what she was doing, and wheeled her cart down the aisle. Her hands were shaking as she climbed the steps to the stage. She didn't know why. This was her job. She had done this 1,000 times before. But tonight, something felt different. The air felt charged, like right before a thunderstorm. Rosa approached the piano and pulled out her cleaning cloth. She wiped down the surface, removed the fingerprints, polished the wood until it gleamed. And then she just stood there, staring at the keys. 88 of them, black and white, perfectly aligned, before she could talk herself out of it. Rosa pulled out the bench and sat down. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was crazy. This was wrong. She wasn't a pianist. She had no right to be sitting here. But her hands had already moved to the keyboard, hovering just above the keys, not quite touching them. She took a deep breath and pressed down on middle C again, the same note from 3 nights ago. The sound filled the empty auditorium, pure and clear. Then she played another note, and another. Her right hand began to move, slowly picking out a melody she hadn't played in 40 years. It was the Chopin Nocturne, the one her grandmother had taught her all those years ago in the Philippines. The one she had played over and over as a girl until she knew every note by heart. Her left hand joined in, finding the bass notes, the chords. Her fingers were stiff at first, uncertain. She hit wrong notes. Her timing was off. But she kept playing, and gradually something began to happen. Her hands remembered. Muscle memory from 4 decades ago came flooding back, and the music started to flow. Tears streamed down Rosa's face, but she didn't stop playing. She couldn't stop. The music poured out of her like water from a broken dam. All the years of holding back, of pushing down her dreams, of being invisible, all came out through her fingers on those keys. The auditorium filled with sound, with emotion, the kind of raw beauty that Rosa had forgotten existed. She played the nocturne all the way through, her tears falling onto the keys. When she finished, she sat there with her hands still on the keyboard, breathing hard, her whole body trembling. Who's there? Rosa's blood turned to ice. The voice had come from somewhere behind her, from the back of the auditorium. She spun around on the bench, her eyes trying to pierce the darkness beyond the stage lights. A figure emerged from the shadows near the back entrance. A man walking down the aisle toward the stage. Rosa's mind went blank with panic. She shot to her feet, knocking the bench backward with a loud crash that echoed through the hall. "I'm so sorry." The words tumbled out of her mouth in a rush. "Please, I shouldn't have touched it. I was just cleaning and Please don't fire me. Please. I need this job. I won't ever touch it again. I promise." The man held up his hands as he got closer. Rosa could see him better now under the stage lights. He was maybe 45, Asian, wearing jeans and a nice jacket. She didn't recognize him, but that didn't mean anything. Lots of people came and went from the concert hall. He could be anyone. A board member. A donor. Someone important enough to get her fired. Hey, it's okay," the man said, his voice gentle. "I'm not going to fire you. I don't even work here. I left my laptop in one of the offices earlier. I came back to get it." Rosa wiped at her face, trying to compose herself. Her hands were still shaking. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been playing. That was Chopin," the man interrupted. He had stopped at the edge of the stage, looking up at her with an expression Rosa couldn't quite read. "Nocturne in E-flat major. Where did you learn to play like that?" "I don't play," Rosa said quickly. "I mean, I used to, a long time ago. But I'm not a musician. I just clean here." The man climbed the steps to the stage, moving slowly like he didn't want to scare her. "I'm Daniel Chen," he said. "I'm a music producer. I work with recording artists, help them make albums, that kind of thing. And I've been in this business for 20 years. He paused, looking at her intently. "That was one of the most beautiful things I've heard in a very long time." Rosa shook her head. "No, you don't understand. I made so many mistakes. My timing was off. I haven't played in 40 years. Real musicians, the people who play here, they're trained. They've studied their whole lives." "You're right," Daniel said. "They are trained. They're technically perfect. But what you just played? It had something that most of them spend their whole careers trying to find. It had soul. It had feeling. You made me stop in my tracks and just listen." Rosa didn't know what to say. This didn't make any sense. She was a janitor. She was nobody. Why was this man, this producer, looking at her like she was something special? "How did you learn?" Daniel asked again, his voice softer now, so Rosa told him. Standing there on the stage at almost 3 in the morning, she told him about her grandmother, about the lessons in the Philippines, about learning to play on that old piano in the village, about her grandmother getting sick and dying and how the music had died with her, about coming to America and working jobs that left her too tired to think about dreams, about 40 years of silence, Daniel listened to everything without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" He finally said, "Why did you play tonight? After all these years, why now?" Rosa looked down at her hands. The same hands that scrubbed toilets and pushed mops. The same hands that had just created music. "I don't know," she whispered. I couldn't help it anymore. I had to know if I could still do it. If it was still inside me." Daniel nodded slowly, like she had just said something very important. "It's still inside you," he said quietly. Anyone listening could hear that. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Rosa looked at him, confused. "Do about it? I'm going to finish my shift and go home. That's what I'm going to do." But even as she said the words, something in her chest was stirring. Something that felt dangerous and exciting and terrifying all at once. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He held it out to her. "I want to talk to you more about this. Not tonight, but soon. Would that be okay?" Rosa stared at the card like it might bite her. "Talk about what?" "About your story. About your music. About what comes next." She took the card with trembling fingers. It was simple, just his name and a phone number. "I don't understand," Daniel said with a small smile. "Just think about it, okay?" And Rosa, he had started to walk away but turned back. "Thank you for the most unexpected and beautiful thing I've heard in years." Then he was gone. His footsteps echoing down the aisle, leaving Rosa standing alone on the stage, holding a business card and wondering if the last 15 minutes had actually happened, or if she had somehow fallen asleep and dreamed the whole thing. Rosa didn't sleep at all that night. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling as the sun came up, turning the business card over and over in her hands. Daniel Chin, music producer. Just a simple white card with black letters, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Part of her wanted to throw it away, pretend the whole thing had never happened. Go back to her life of cleaning floors and being invisible. That was safe. That was familiar. She knew how to do that. But another part of her, a part she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed, kept whispering, "What if?" Around noon, Rosa finally gave up on sleep. She made herself a cup of instant coffee and sat at her tiny kitchen table, looking at the card again. Her phone sat next to it, silent. She could call. She could not call. Both options scared her equally. She thought about her grandmother. What would she say if she were here now? Rosa could almost hear her voice, speaking in Tagalog, with that gentle firmness she always had. "The gift is not yours to waste, little one. When God gives you something beautiful, you honor it by using it." But her grandmother had lived in a different world, a simpler world. She had never had to work 3 jobs just to survive. She had never been an immigrant in a country where people looked through you like you were made of glass. She had never been 53 years old, with nothing to show for her life, except tired bones and empty pockets. Rosa picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Finally, she dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe she could hang up and forget this whole crazy idea. "Hello?" Daniel's voice came through, friendly and warm. Rosa's mouth went dry. Hello. This is Rosa, from the concert hall. The janitor. You gave me your card last night, Rosa. I'm so glad you called. I was hoping you would. I don't. I'm not sure why I'm calling, Rosa admitted. I don't even know what you want from me. Can we meet? Daniel asked. Just to talk. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street near the park. Do you know it? Rosa did know it. She passed it on the bus sometimes, on her way home from her shift. It was the kind of place where young people sat with their laptops, drinking expensive coffee that cost more than her lunch. She had never been inside. I don't have money for fancy coffee, she said quietly. My treat, Daniel said immediately. Please, just give me an hour of your time. If you don't like what I have to say, you never have to talk to me again. Oh. Rosa closed her eyes. This was insane. But she heard herself saying, okay. When? Today, This afternoon. I know you probably sleep during the day because of your schedule, but I couldn't sleep anyway, Rosa interrupted. What time? They agreed to meet at 3 o'clock. After Rosa hung up, she sat very still, wondering what she had just done. Then she looked down at herself. She was wearing old sweatpants and a t-shirt with a hole in the collar. If she was going to meet this man, this producer, she should probably look presentable. She went to her tiny closet and pulled out the best clothes she owned. A pair of clean jeans, a blue blouse she had bought at a thrift store 2 years ago for her cousin's wedding. She showered, got dressed, and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She still looked like a tired cleaning lady, but at least she was a clean one. The coffee shop was busy when Rosa arrived, full of people typing on computers and chatting with friends. She spotted Daniel sitting at a corner table, and he waved when he saw her. Rosa made her way over, feeling out of place among all these young, confident people. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said, standing up to shake her hand. "What can I get you?" "Just regular coffee is fine," Rosa said. But Daniel ordered her something called a cappuccino and a blueberry muffin before she could protest. When he came back to the table with everything, Rosa wrapped her hands around the warm cup and waited for him to explain why she was here. Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "I want to tell you about a project I'm working on. It's a documentary series about music and talent and the stories that get overlooked. Each episode features someone who has an incredible gift but never had the chance to share it with the world." Rosa felt her stomach twist. "You want to make a film about me? Not just about you. With you. I want to record your story, your grandmother, your journey. And I want to record you playing. Really playing, not just that one night in an empty concert hall." "But I'm nobody," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just a janitor who used to play piano 40 years ago. Who would want to watch that?" Daniel smiled. "Everyone. That's exactly the kind of story people need to hear. Do you know how many people have dreams they've given up on? How many people think it's too late for them? You could show them that it's never too late. That beauty can come from anywhere, from anyone." Rosa shook her head. "I'm not good enough. You heard me last night. I made mistakes. I'm rusty. Real pianists would laugh at me." "Some might," Daniel admitted. "But the people who matter won't. Rosa, I've worked with technically perfect musicians who sound like robots. What you have is different. You have heart. You have a story. And whether you believe it or not, you have talent." "What would I have to do?" Rosa asked, even though part of her was screaming at her to run away from this conversation. "Let me bring you to a recording studio. Let me film you talking about your life, your grandmother, your music. Let me record you playing. That's all. If you hate it, if it feels wrong, we stop. No pressure. But I think this could be something really special." Rosa took a sip of her cappuccino. It was sweet and foamy and unlike anything she usually drank. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Take all the time you need." But even as Daniel said it, Rosa knew she wouldn't need much time. Because sitting there in that coffee shop, she realized something. She had spent 40 years being invisible. 40 years taking care of everyone else. Her family back home, her employers. Everyone except herself. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to do something for Rosa. "What if I'm terrible?" she asked quietly. "What if I play and everyone realizes I'm just a foolish old woman pretending to be something she's not?" Daniel looked at her steadily. "What if you're amazing? What if you play and everyone realizes that you're exactly who you were always meant to be?" Rosa went home that afternoon with a head full of thoughts and a heart full of fear. Over the next 3 days, she barely ate. She paced her small apartment. She called her sister in the Philippines at 2 in the morning, waking her up, needing to hear a familiar voice. "Ate, Rosa," her sister said, using the Tagalog word for older sister. "What's wrong? Are you sick?" Rosa told her everything. About playing the piano. About Daniel. About the documentary. When she finished, there was silence on the other line. "Ate," her sister finally said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you remember what Lola used to say? Our grandmother. She said a lot of things. She said you were special. She said you had music in your soul. And she made me promise before she died that I would remind you of that if you ever forgot.
How?
Her sister paused. You forgot 8. For 40 years you forgot. Don't forget anymore. Rosa was crying now, tears running down her face in the darkness of her apartment. I'm scared. Good, that means it matters. Do it anyway. The next morning, Rosa picked up her phone and called Daniel. When he answered, she didn't give herself time to think. Okay, she said. I'll do it. I'll try. I don't know if I can, but I'll try. She could hear the smile in Daniel's voice. That's all anyone can ever do, Rosa. That's all anyone can ever do. After she hung up, Rosa sat very still. She had just agreed to something that terrified her, something that could end in embarrassment and failure. But she'd also just agreed to something that made her feel alive for the first time in decades. She looked at her hands. These rough, work-worn hands that had scrubbed so many floors. Tomorrow, they would start a new job. Tomorrow, they would make music again. Rosa didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time in 40 years, she was actually excited to find out. The recording studio was nothing like Rosa had imagined. She had pictured something glamorous, something out of a movie. But when Daniel picked her up that first Saturday morning and drove her across town, they ended up at a converted warehouse in an industrial area. From the outside, it looked like nothing special. Just another old building with peeling paint and a loading dock. Inside was different. The walls were covered with foam padding and dark fabric. There were rooms within rooms, each one sealed off with heavy doors. And in the center of the main recording space sat a beautiful grand piano, smaller than the one at the concert hall, but no less magnificent. Rosa stood in the doorway, frozen. Her palms were sweating. Her heart was racing. What was she doing here? She was a janitor. She cleaned toilets for a living. She had no business in a place like this. Hey, Daniel said gently, noticing her hesitation. You okay? I think I made a mistake, Rosa whispered. I can't do this. Daniel didn't try to convince her or push her forward. He just waited. After a long moment, he said, Want to hear something funny? Every single person I've ever brought to this studio says the same thing on their first day. Even the famous ones. Even the ones who've been playing their whole lives. That feeling you have right now? That's just your brain trying to protect you from being vulnerable. But the only way to create something real is to be vulnerable. Rosa looked at him. What if I'm terrible? Then you're terrible. And we try again tomorrow. And the day after that? Daniel smiled. But Rosa, I heard you play. You're not terrible. You're rusty, sure, but we have time. We have all the time you need. Over the next few weeks, Rosa fell into a new routine. She still worked her night shifts at the concert hall. She still cleaned the floors and bathrooms and took out the trash. But 3 mornings a week, instead of going straight home to sleep, she took the bus across town to Daniel's studio. At first, it was painful. Her fingers stumbled over the keys. She couldn't remember pieces she had once played perfectly. She would get frustrated and have to step away from the piano, her eyes burning with tears of embarrassment. Daniel never judged her. He would make her tea. Let her take breaks. Sometimes they wouldn't play at all. They would just talk, and he would record their conversations. He asked about her childhood in the Philippines, about her grandmother, about coming to America, about all the years of working and surviving and pushing down her dreams. Why did you keep going? He asked her one day. All those years of hard work, sending money home, barely making ends meet. What kept you from giving up? Rosa had to think about that, I guess. I guess because giving up felt worse than keeping going. At least if I kept working, I was doing something. I was helping my sister. I was paying my bills. If I gave up, what would I have? Nothing. And the music. Daniel pressed gently. Did you ever think about it? During all those years? Every day, Rosa admitted, her voice cracking. Every single day? But thinking about it hurt too much, so I tried not to. I tried to pretend that part of me had died with my grandmother, but it didn't die, Daniel said quietly. No, Rosa agreed, looking at the piano. It didn't die. It was just sleeping. Slowly, painfully, the music began to wake up. Rosa's fingers remembered more each session. The Chopin Nocturne came back first, the one she had played that night when Daniel heard her. Then other pieces started surfacing from her memory. A Bach prelude, a Mozart sonata, songs her grandmother had taught her, one by one. In that little village so far away and so long ago, but Daniel didn't just want her to play the old pieces. He encouraged her to try new things too. He brought in sheet music, simple at first, then gradually more complex. Rosa struggled with reading music. Her grandmother had taught her mostly by ear, by watching and listening and copying. But Daniel was patient. He sat beside her at the piano, helping her decode the notes, showing her how to break down complicated passages into smaller parts. "You're learning faster than you think," he told her after a particularly frustrating session. "You're not starting from zero, Rosa. You're just remembering what you already knew." On the weekends, Daniel brought in his film crew. Just 2 people, a camera operator and a sound technician. They were young and friendly and treated Rosa like she was someone important. They filmed her playing. They filmed her talking. They even went with her one evening to the concert hall and filmed her doing her regular job, pushing her cleaning cart down those familiar hallways. "This is important," Daniel explained. "People need to see all of you, not just the pianist, but the woman who worked so hard for so long. That's what makes your story powerful." 3 months into the project, Daniel asked Rosa if she would be willing to play for a small audience. Nothing big, he promised. Just a few of his colleagues from the music industry, people who understood what she was trying to do. Rosa's first instinct was to say no. Absolutely not. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. But then she thought about her grandmother, about her sister back in the Philippines, about all the years she had hidden her light under a bushel, as the saying went. "Okay," she heard herself say. "I'll do it." The night of the small performance, Rosa thought she might throw up. There were only 15 people in the studio, sitting in folding chairs arranged in a semicircle around the piano. But to Rosa, it felt like thousands. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely walk to the piano bench. She sat down and looked at the keys. For a moment, her mind went completely blank. She couldn't remember a single note of anything she had practiced. Panic rose in her throat. Then she heard her grandmother's voice in her head, as clear as day. "Breathe, little one. The music is still there. You just have to let it out." Rosa took a deep breath. Then another. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The Chopin Nocturne flowed out. Not perfect, not polished, but real. She played with her eyes closed, letting herself feel every note. When she finished, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the small audience began to clap. Rosa opened her eyes and saw people wiping tears from their faces. One woman, someone Daniel had introduced as a music journalist, was crying openly. Daniel was standing off to the side, beaming with pride. After everyone left, Daniel sat down next to Rosa at the piano. "You know what happens next, right?" Rosa shook her head, still overwhelmed by what had just happened. "We go bigger," Daniel said. "I want to submit your story to the film festival circuit. But more than that, I want to arrange a real performance. A public one. At the concert hall where you work?" Rosa's eyes went wide. "The Riverside Concert Hall?" "Daniel, that's impossible. People who play there are professionals. Real musicians?" "You are a real musician," Daniel said firmly. "And your story deserves to be heard on that stage. The stage you've been cleaning for 7 years. Don't you think it's time you stood on it as something other than the janitor?" Rosa looked down at her hands. These hands that had done so much hard work. These hands that had finally, after 40 years, made music again. Could they really do what Daniel was suggesting? Could she really stand on that stage, in front of hundreds of people and play? The old Rosa would have said no immediately, would have laughed at the very idea. But something had changed over these past few months. She had changed. She had started to believe, just a little bit, that maybe she was worth something. That maybe her dreams mattered. "If I do this," she said slowly, "and I'm terrible, and people laugh at me, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me it will have been worth it anyway." Promise me that trying was better than wondering for the rest of my life what might have happened." Daniel put his hand over hers. "Rosa, I promise you that no matter what happens, you've already done something incredible. You've already won. Everything else is just sharing that victory with other people." Rosa nodded slowly. Her heart was pounding, but this time it wasn't just from fear. It was from excitement. From the possibility that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to become something she had never dared to imagine. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do it. Let's really do it." And with those words, Rosa Martinez, the 53-year-old night janitor, began preparing for the performance that would change everything. The day of the performance, Rosa woke up at noon and immediately felt sick to her stomach. Tonight, at 7 o'clock, she would walk onto the stage at Riverside Concert Hall. Not with a mop and bucket, not in her janitor's uniform, but as a pianist. The concert hall management had been skeptical at first when Daniel approached them about the idea. A janitor performing. It was unheard of. But Daniel had shown them footage of Rosa playing. He had told them her story. And somehow, miraculously, they had agreed. They even decided to make it a special benefit concert, with all proceeds going to music education programs for underprivileged children. The tickets had sold out in 3 days. Rosa still couldn't believe it. 250 people were coming to hear her play. Her Rosa Martinez. The woman who had spent 7 years being invisible in that very building. Her sister had called from the Philippines that morning, crying with joy. "Lola would be so proud," she kept saying. "Our grandmother is watching from heaven, 8. She's watching and she's smiling." Rosa hoped that was true. She hoped her grandmother could somehow see this moment. Because everything that was about to happen, it was all because of those precious 2 years of lessons in that little village. All those years ago, Daniel picked Rosa up at 5 o'clock. He had wanted to hire a car service, something fancy, but Rosa had refused. "I'm still me," she had told him. Fancy cars won't change that. So he drove her himself in his regular car, and they didn't talk much during the ride. Rosa stared out the window, watching the familiar streets go by, trying to calm her racing heart. When they pulled up to the concert hall, Rosa saw the marquee sign out front. In big black letters, it read, "An evening with Rosa Martinez, a journey from silence to song." Below that, in smaller letters, "Special benefit performance." "They spelled my name right," Rosa said, and then she started laughing. She laughed until tears ran down her face, until Daniel was laughing too, both of them sitting in the parked car, laughing at the absurdity and wonder of it all. Inside, the concert hall buzzed with activity. People were setting up programs, testing lights. The piano sat on stage, waiting. Rosa's piano now, at least for tonight. She walked backstage with Daniel, and a woman handed her a garment bag. "What's this?" Rosa asked. "Your dress," Daniel said with a smile. "I hope you don't mind. I had my assistant pick it out." Rosa unzipped the bag and found a simple but elegant navy blue dress. Nothing too fancy, nothing that would make her feel like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. It was perfect. She changed in one of the dressing rooms, the same one she had cleaned 100 times. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair was styled, pulled back softly from her face. The dress fit well. She looked like someone who belonged on a stage. At 6:30, Daniel knocked on her door. "There are some people here who want to see you before the show. Is that okay?" Rosa opened the door and found a small group waiting in the hallway. Her supervisor from the janitorial company, the head of security from the concert hall who had always said good morning to her, 2 of the regular musicians who performed there, and in the front, her sister's oldest daughter, who had flown in from California as a surprise, Tita Rosa. Her niece cried, using the Filipino word for aunt. She rushed forward and hugged Rosa tight. "I couldn't miss this. I told my mom I had to be here." Rosa held her niece and cried into her shoulder. "You came all this way? Are you kidding? You're about to make history, Tita. Of course I came." The others offered their congratulations and encouragement. Her supervisor, a gruff man who rarely smiled, had tears in his eyes. Always knew there was something special about you, Rosa, he said. Proud doesn't even cover it. At 6:45, everyone cleared out to find their seats. Daniel stayed with Rosa backstage. They could hear the audience filing in, the murmur of voices, the excited chatter. The house was full. I can't do this, Rosa said suddenly. Daniel, I can't. There are too many people. What was I thinking? You're thinking that you have a gift and a story worth sharing, Daniel said calmly. You're thinking that you've spent 40 years being silent, and tonight you get to be heard. That's what you're thinking. What if I freeze? What if my hand shakes so badly I can't play? Then they shake. You play anyway. Daniel took her hands in his. Rosa, listen to me. You've already won. The moment you sat down at that piano 6 months ago and decided to try, you won. Everything that happens tonight is just celebration. At 7 o'clock sharp, the house lights dimmed. Daniel had arranged for a local news anchor to serve as the host for the evening. She walked onto the stage, and the audience quieted down. Good evening, everyone, she began. Thank you for being here tonight for a very special performance. What you're about to witness is more than just a concert. It's a story about dreams deferred but not forgotten, about talent that was hidden but never lost. It's about a woman who cleaned this very stage for 7 years, never imagining she would one day stand on it as a performer. She went on to tell Rosa's story. The childhood in the Philippines, the grandmother who taught her, the 40 years of silence. The night Daniel heard her play, the audience listened in rapt attention. Rosa, waiting in the wings, felt like she might faint. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Rosa Martinez. The applause started before Rosa even walked out. She stepped onto the stage, her legs shaking, and the applause grew louder. People were standing already, giving her an ovation before she had played a single note. Rosa walked to the piano and sat down. She looked out at the audience, at all those faces watching her, waiting. She saw her niece in the 3rd row, crying and smiling. She saw her former colleagues scattered throughout the crowd. She saw Daniel standing off to the side, giving her a thumbs up, and then she looked at the piano keys. These keys she had cleaned so many times, these keys that had called to her night after night, year after year. She placed her hands on them and began to play. The Chopin Nocturne filled the concert hall. Rosa played with her eyes closed, letting the music pour out of her. Every note carried 40 years of longing. Every phrase held memories of her grandmother's gentle hands guiding hers. Every chord expressed all the times she had pushed down her dreams and told herself she was nobody. But she wasn't nobody. She was Rosa Martinez. She was a woman who had survived and worked and sacrificed. She was a granddaughter carrying on a legacy of love and music. She was exactly who she was supposed to be. When the final note faded away, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then the entire audience erupted. People jumped to their feet, applauding, cheering, some crying openly. The ovation went on and on. Rosa opened her eyes and saw faces full of joy and emotion and recognition. They weren't just applauding her playing. They were applauding her courage, her journey, her refusal to let her dreams die completely. In her story, they saw their own deferred dreams, their own untapped potential, their own what-ifs. Rosa played 3 more pieces that night. Each one was received with the same thunderous appreciation. When the concert ended, people lined up to meet her, to shake her hand, to tell her what her story meant to them. One older woman, probably in her 70s, took Rosa's hands and said, I gave up painting 30 years ago. Tomorrow, I'm buying brushes. Thank you for reminding me it's not too late. Daniel's documentary premiered 3 months later at a major film festival. It won the Audience Award and was picked up by a streaming service. Suddenly, Rosa's story was being watched by millions of people around the world. Interview requests poured in. She appeared on morning talk shows. A book publisher offered her a deal to write her memoir. But the best part, the part that Rosa treasured most, was what happened next at the concert hall. The management offered her a new position. Not as a janitor, though they assured her there was no shame in that work, but as their community outreach coordinator. developing programs to bring music education to people who couldn't afford it. Rosa accepted immediately. She also kept playing. She performed at local venues, at schools, at community centers. She never became a world-famous concert pianist, and she didn't want to be. That wasn't the point. The point was that she had found her voice again. She had reclaimed the part of herself she thought was lost forever. 1 year after that first performance, Rosa stood backstage at Riverside Concert Hall again. She was about to perform in a benefit concert for the scholarship fund she had helped establish. The fund provided music lessons for children who otherwise couldn't afford them. It was named after her grandmother. As she waited to go on, Rosa thought about that night 6 months ago, when she had sat at the piano alone, believing no one would ever hear her play. She thought about all the years she had been invisible, cleaning up after other people's dreams. But she wasn't invisible anymore. And more importantly, she had learned that she had never really been invisible at all. She had always mattered. Her dreams had always been valid. It had just taken 40 years and one moment of courage for her to believe it. Rosa walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. She sat at the piano and smiled at the audience. Then she began to play, her heart full, her hands sure, her grandmother's love flowing through every single note.